Female loneliness is a silent crisis. Despite being more connected than ever, many women feel a deep emptiness, even when surrounded by people. The pressure to balance career, relationships, and personal life only aggravates this feeling. Interestingly, in the midst of so many digital connections, emotional disconnection has never been so evident. Social media fuels unrealistic comparisons and destroys self-esteem, increasing the sense of isolation. Loneliness is an invisible epidemic that many carry in silence. Did you know that 1 in 4 adults in the world admits to feeling lonely? This is a worrying reality, but there's more hidden in this story. For women, this loneliness is often ignored or downplayed. They can be masters at hiding this feeling, camouflaging it with smiles and seemingly busy lives, but inside, the emptiness echoes. For years, this problem has been marginalized, which only worsens the feeling of isolation. Social isolation seems contradictory in today's world, full of online interactions. But interestingly, social networks, which are supposed to connect us, have done the opposite for many women. Everything seems so perfect there: edited lives, seemingly ideal relationships. From the outside, one may feel that their own life doesn't even come close to this illusion of perfection. And that's when loneliness deepens. Spending hours looking at a feed filled with idealized images, where every detail seems planned to impress, ends up being a trigger. The curious thing is, the more time you spend browsing, the greater the feeling of disconnection. This loneliness is not just emotional, it also reflects a pressure that society invisibly imposes. Women constantly have to deal with high expectations, to be exemplary professionals, present mothers, devoted daughters, understanding partners, and still take care of themselves. But in the midst of so many demands, where is the space to feel supported? This overload ends up creating a bubble of isolation. A woman can be surrounded by people and still feel lonely because true emotional connection is missing. She carries responsibilities that aren't always visible but weigh on her daily. As gender roles change, female loneliness also transforms. The old model, where the family was the priority, has been replaced by a greater focus on career and personal achievements. And this is great in many ways, but it can also be lonely. Some may notice, amidst so many goals, an absence of deep bonds. The world teaches us to value productivity and success, but often this comes at the expense of genuine connections. This paradox can generate a feeling of emptiness that many women struggle to explain, even to themselves. This emptiness is also reflected in the relationship difficulties of today. With the fast pace of life and the ease provided by dating apps, everything seems quick and superficial. Connections lose depth, and women may feel they are always searching for something that seems just out of reach. Between encounters that start and end without leaving a mark, the sense of disconnection grows. The issue is that this type of loneliness is not visible to others, but it silently consumes the soul. Social media not only creates this feeling of isolation, but it also fuels incessant comparisons. Images of seemingly perfect bodies and lives circulate constantly, and many women fall into the trap of comparison. This generates an invisible competition, where self-esteem takes constant hits. Insecurity is born, and the woman, already dealing with so many challenges, now feels even more pressured. And in this race to reach the unreal standard, emotional isolation only increases. Social media, with its promise of connection, often creates a dangerous illusion. What seems to be a space of closeness can actually be pushing us further apart. For women, this disconnection is even stronger. Imagine opening Instagram and seeing lives that seem perfect: smiling friends, couples in harmony, career goals achieved. What stays hidden is what's behind those images: the struggles, the failures, the insecurities. This contrast between what's real and what's shown on social media amplifies the feeling of loneliness. The problem is that this false perfection becomes a reference for many women. They start to believe that, to be enough, they need to fit into this standard. So what began as a desire to share moments ends up becoming a vicious cycle of seeking validation. Likes and comments replace real connections. And the more one seeks this digital approval, the more emotionally isolated one may feel. A woman may have hundreds of followers and still feel invisible. Furthermore, social media doesn't show the emotional cost of living to create an image. For many, the pressure to always be on top is suffocating. They feel the need to show that they have a perfect life, even if it doesn't match reality. The curious thing is that, even knowing social media is a distorted showcase, it's hard to resist the temptation to compare your own life with others. This cycle of comparisons destroys self-esteem and deepens the sense of disconnection, something that can go unnoticed even by those closest to you. Another factor is the time that social media consumes. With every swipe of the screen, minutes, hours disappear. This time could be invested in real connections, in meaningful conversations, but it ends up being spent on superficial interactions. And at the end of the day, what's left is a feeling of emptiness, as if nothing was really lived. For women who already deal with so many daily demands, this loss of time is especially harmful. The lack of time to genuinely connect with others only feeds loneliness. There's also the issue of expectations. On social media, everything is immediate: happiness, success, love. But in real life, things happen in their own time. When a woman doesn't see her dreams coming true as quickly as she observes on social media, it can lead to frustration. She begins to question, what am I doing wrong? This type of thinking is destructive because it creates the false impression that other people's achievements are faster and easier, when, in reality, what's posted is only a fraction of the story. Amidst all this, social media also distances us from introspection. Silence, the time to reflect on oneself, often disappears between one notification and another. The constant search for novelty on social media makes a woman drift away from her own emotions. And without that reflection, it's difficult to identify what truly matters to her. It's not uncommon to find women who, after taking a break from social media, discover how emotionally drained they were and realize they need time for themselves. This illusion of social media naturally leads us to reflect on the impact of other external pressures, such as societal expectations placed on women. And that brings us to the next point. Society imposes a heavy burden on women, demanding that they play multiple roles with mastery. They must be present mothers, successful professionals, dedicated partners, and at the same time, maintain self-care. It's no surprise that this constant pressure creates a sense of isolation. With so many conflicting expectations, many women feel they are failing, no matter how hard they try. The need to fulfill all these roles can be suffocating, and emotions often get swallowed by the weight of daily responsibilities. A woman might leave home early for work, spend the day rushing to meet deadlines, and still come home to care for her family. Yet amid all this, there's little time for herself. And the irony is that even surrounded by people, she often feels alone. This loneliness is not visible, but it is real. She may even wonder, does anyone really understand what I'm going through? The truth is, often the answer seems to be no. And this deepens the feeling of disconnection. The pressure to handle everything comes not only from society, but also from within the home. Family expectations can be equally overwhelming. There's a popular saying that a woman should be like the glue that holds everything together. But who takes care of the woman who is constantly holding the pieces together? Often, this woman ends up neglecting her own needs to meet those of others. A practical example of this is self-care. How many times does she postpone a moment for herself because something more urgent came up? This cycle creates a spiral of emotional exhaustion. Moreover, social pressures make women feel judged for every choice they make. If she decides to focus on her career, she might hear that she's neglecting her family. If she chooses to dedicate herself to her children, she might be seen as someone who gave up on her professional dreams. This constant judgment undermines self-esteem and makes many feel isolated in their decisions. It's as if any path chosen is wrong in someone's eyes, and this lack of support amplifies emotional loneliness. The worst part is that for many women, This social pressure has become so normalized that they don't even realize the impact it has on their lives. It's like a silent expectation, always present, guiding every action and decision. They continue trying to balance all the demands without realizing the emotional toll it takes. A simple example can be seen in everyday situations, like choosing between working a few more hours or going home earlier to spend time with the family. It may seem like a small decision, but it carries enormous weight. In this pursuit of balance, many women end up emotionally isolating themselves. They are afraid to share their frustrations, believing it would make them seem weak or incapable. This invisible yet real barrier causes them to carry the burden alone. What could be alleviated by an honest conversation turns into another layer of loneliness. Sharing these feelings with trusted people, or even seeking support networks that understand these challenges, can be a way out. But often, this step seems difficult to take. And speaking of support networks, this feeling of isolation connects with a broader issue: the way women's social roles are changing and the new norms that arise with it. Let's explore this transition further. Gender roles are changing rapidly, and with these changes come new pressures and challenges for women. Before, the path seemed more defined. Taking care of the family was the main priority for many, while the workplace took a back seat. But today, women are increasingly taking leadership roles, building careers, and assuming positions of prominence. This new scenario, while empowering, brings with it a sense of displacement. The balance between personal and professional life often seems like an impossible task. The problem is that while professional expectations rise, the old domestic responsibilities rarely disappear. Women are encouraged to pursue success at work, but often still bear the burden of managing the household. It's like trying to balance two worlds in parallel. Amid so many demands, there's a sense that something is always being left behind. Whether it's time with the family, personal care, or even friendships, some aspect of life always seems to be lacking, and this creates a sense of incompleteness. This transition also affects personal relationships. The changes in social values, where career and personal growth are prioritized, can create a disconnect with partners or family members who still expect women to play the same traditional roles as before. Conversations about quality time and balance don't always result in mutual understanding. This ends up widening the emotional distance in many relationships, leaving women feeling even more lonely, even when they're surrounded by loved ones. The curious thing is that while these changes are, in essence, liberating, they bring an emotional cost that few people discuss. Instead of feeling more fulfilled, many women report an increase in anxiety and a sense of isolation. After all, how is it possible to handle everything without feeling overwhelmed? And when society celebrates individual success but ignores the emotional support needed to sustain that success, the emptiness can feel even greater. It's a situation that few can articulate, but many experience. There's also the pressure of time. The idea that you need to have it all and have it now is ingrained in modern expectations. For many women, this means prioritizing their careers in the early years of adulthood, leaving things like family and relationships for later. But as time goes by, many begin to question their choices, especially when they realize that things didn't happen as they imagined. This feeling that time is running out can create constant anxiety and a sense of urgency that deepens loneliness. Moreover, society is still in transition, which makes many women feel trapped between two worlds, the traditional and the modern. They are encouraged to emancipate themselves and pursue their dreams, but at the same time, they still face outdated expectations that demand roles that no longer make sense. This internal conflict creates an invisible tension, hard to express, but felt daily. Seeking support and understanding in this constantly changing scenario can seem like a lonely task. These difficulties are only one piece of the puzzle. And when it comes to the emotional side of relationships, particularly in the context of the modern world, things get even more complex. Let's talk more about that next. Modern relationships have become increasingly complex, especially with the speed and superficiality of today's interactions. Dating apps, instant messaging, and social networks offer an abundance of options. But are we truly more connected? For many women, the answer is no. The excess of options creates a sense of disposability. Connections that should be meaningful become momentary, and the superficiality of interactions makes the search for something deeper frustrating. This new rhythm in relationships can leave many women feeling like they are always trying again, without ever finding something truly worthwhile. A few exchanged messages here, a date there, and in the end, everything seems to dissipate without leaving a trace. The rush to connect, often driven by the fear of being alone, ends up generating the opposite, an even greater sense of disconnection. This is especially true when emotional expectations aren't met, and the relationship seems to never go beyond the surface. What many don't realize is that this continuous cycle of quick, superficial relationships ends up affecting self-esteem. Rejection, which may seem small at first, accumulates over time. Every no or relationship that doesn't evolve as expected is interpreted as a reflection of something wrong with them. And this constant self-criticism creates an emotional barrier, making it even harder to open up to new romantic possibilities with confidence and security. Another point worth mentioning is the external pressure women face to find someone. Whether in conversations with friends, family, or on social media, there's an expectation that full happiness is tied to a romantic relationship. And for those who haven't found that ideal partner yet, this can generate deep anxiety. It's as if the clock is always ticking, creating a sense of urgency that, ironically, can push away authentic connections. And those who don't feel this urgency often end up questioning their own choices. The modern dating culture has also brought a new dynamic, the fear of missing out. With so many apparent options, many women feel they need to always be available, always on the market. This creates pressure to constantly engage, always trying. The result is emotional exhaustion. Instead of building deep, meaningful relationships, they end up getting involved in an endless cycle of encounters without true connection. This not only creates fatigue, but also reinforces the idea that emotional depth is a rarity. And amid all this, an important question arises. Are we prioritizing the right things in relationships? Often, the focus is so much on the hunt for the next date that we forget to ask ourselves if we are truly ready for a deep and authentic relationship. Perhaps the key to breaking this cycle of superficiality is first nurturing the most important relationship of all, the one with yourself. Self-worth and caring for one's own emotions are fundamental steps toward attracting true connections. These reflections on the challenges of modern relationships pave the way for a topic that, in many ways, intensifies them: the comparisons and unrealistic standards set by social media, which we will discuss shortly. Modern relationships have become increasingly complex, especially with the speed and superficiality of today's interactions. Dating apps, instant messaging, and social networks offer an abundance of options. But are we truly more connected? For many women, the answer is no. The excess of options creates a sense of disposability. Connections that should be meaningful become momentary, and the superficiality of interactions makes the search for something deeper frustrating. This new rhythm in relationships can leave many women feeling like they are always trying again, without ever finding something truly worthwhile. A few exchanged messages here, a date there, and in the end, everything seems to dissipate without leaving a trace. The rush to connect, often driven by the fear of being alone, ends up generating the opposite, an even greater sense of disconnection. This is especially true when emotional expectations aren't met, and the relationship seems to never go beyond the surface. What many don't realize is that this continuous cycle of quick, superficial relationships ends up affecting self-esteem. Rejection, which may seem small at first, accumulates over time. Every no or relationship that doesn't evolve as expected is interpreted as a reflection of something wrong with them. And this constant self-criticism creates an emotional barrier, making it even harder to open up to new romantic possibilities with confidence and security. Another point worth mentioning is the external pressure women face to find someone. Whether in conversations with friends, family, or on social media, there's an expectation that full happiness is tied to a romantic relationship. And for those who haven't found that ideal partner yet, this can generate deep anxiety. It's as if the clock is always ticking, creating a sense of urgency that, ironically, can push away authentic connections. And those who don't feel this urgency often end up questioning their own choices. The modern dating culture has also brought a new dynamic: the fear of missing out. With so many apparent options, many women feel they need to always be available, always on the market. This creates pressure to constantly engage, always trying. The result is emotional exhaustion. Instead of building deep, meaningful relationships, they end up getting involved in an endless cycle of encounters without true connection. This not only creates fatigue, but also reinforces the idea that emotional depth is a rarity. And amid all this, an important question arises: are we prioritizing the right things in relationships? Often, the focus is so much on the hunt for the next date that we forget to ask ourselves if we are truly ready for a deep and authentic relationship. Perhaps the key to breaking this cycle of superficiality is first nurturing the most important relationship of all, the one with yourself. Self-worth and caring for one's own emotions are fundamental steps toward attracting true connections. These reflections on the challenges of modern relationships pave the way for a topic that, in many ways, intensifies them: the comparisons and unrealistic standards set by social media, which we will discuss shortly. A practical way to deal with this trap is to limit the time spent on social media and consciously curate who you follow. How about starting to follow profiles that promote well-being, self-esteem, and acceptance? There are many inspiring women who share their real journeys, with highs and lows, and these stories can serve as anchors for those feeling lost amid the comparisons. This small step can make a huge difference in how one sees themselves and connects with others. And as this transformation happens, a new understanding of modern loneliness and emotional isolation begins to emerge. Let's explore this feeling more deeply next. If you want to continue delving into this topic and learn more about how to deal with female loneliness, don't miss the next video that is on the screen now. I'm sure it will complement everything we discussed today. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take this chance to do so and activate notifications. That way, you won't miss any new content and will continue your journey of transformation. I hope what we discussed here helped you reflect on loneliness and the pressures you face. I'm looking forward to hearing in the comments what you thought and how you plan to apply this knowledge in your life. See you next time.